Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the latest in our webinar series, A Higher Vision, the Changing Nature of Irish Education. I'm Colm Markey MEP from Midlands Northwest, and I'm here tonight to discuss this very important topic. 2022 is the year it's the European Year of Youth. And I suppose as we exit the pandemic and we reflect on the changes that has brought, I suppose, to the Irish education system, like if you consider COVID has changed the dynamic of the Leaving Cert over the last number of years and made us reflect on how effective the Leaving Cert as an exam is. Also, if you like, the nature of lifelong learning has become so relevant over the last number of years. The nature of education in all its facets has changed. Impact in relation to apprenticeships and the importance of more people taking up apprenticeships. And I think that kind of focuses on the, if you like, the different pathways which people can enter into third level education. Traditionally, we would have always thought that it was, if you like, through you did your leaving, you got your points, and you went to third level and you exited third level and went into a career. So much years. And I'd like to a wonderful panel here to discuss this changing nature of education and what I suppose the needs are in the years ahead. Our guest speaker is Minister for Further and Higher Education, who has made no secret of the fact that fan on the system that's there and how we should go about doing that. We also have Emer Neville, who is a president of the Irish Second Level Students' Union, and to give us a perspective, I suppose, from the second level students, who are the ones very much in the front line of engaging with, if you like, the Leaving Cert and entering into third level. We also have Owen Patrick Ward, Programme Coordinator at the Access Centre in NUIG. He's played a key role in setting up the Sanctuary Scholarship in NUIG, which is open to the like of refugees, immigrants, and indeed the traveller community. And finally, we have Professor Tom Collins, who has a long history, if you like, in the education system. He was involved in DKIT in Dundalk, in my local area. He also was in Maynooth University as the head of Maynooth University. In more recent times, he was central to the amalgamation, I suppose, of the three ITs in Dublin, and has a long background. In particular, the one that interests me most of all, I suppose, is, like myself, he spent some time in Muckinaferma in his early years. So I suppose we'd ask you to put any questions you have into the chat, and we'll put them into the panel after they speak. We're essentially going to give each speaker about 5 minutes to give an intro to set a little bit of context, and then we'll go to your questions so that you can ask the questions that you feel are relevant. And if you put them into the chat, I'll put them to the panel at that stage. So without going any further, I'll pass over to the Minister. I know he has big ambition in terms of reforming the education system. He's made a big play as regards the importance of apprenticeships and the role in the economy and in society as a whole. So over to you, Minister, to just give us a little bit of an overview from your perspective as where you see the future of education going.
Well, thanks so much, Colm. And firstly, thank you very much for organising tonight's webinar. And indeed, thank you for all that you've done in terms of really hitting the ground running since you've taken up your role as a member of the European Parliament. And I know you've been doing a number of these webinars on a whole variety of issues, trying to engage people right across Midlands Northwest. So just to thank you for all that you're doing. Delighted to join such a distinguished panel tonight. I know two of the panelists personally. Professor Tom Collins, who I was reading in an article in 2000 in the Irish Times, was described as a very big wheel in adult education. And I think that might have actually been an understatement. Tom has been a transformational figure in terms of the development of further and higher education in Ireland, and it's really great to have you here, Tom. Owen Patrick Ward, an individual I have huge respect and admiration for. Your leadership on inclusion and on traveller education in particular in Galway and beyond has made a real difference to the lives of many families, many communities, and to the benefit of our higher education system. And I haven't had the pleasure of meeting Emer Neville in person, but I do want to say I think one of the good things to come out of the pandemic, and there hasn't been that many, has been the emergence of really strong, articulate student advocate voices at second level education. And be it this year, or indeed be it last year, I think the ISSU has done students absolutely proud, and it's right and proper that any Minister for Education now and into the future doesn't talk at students, but talks with them in terms of having student representatives in the room when decisions are being made. So I just wanted to congratulate and thank you, Emer, for all of your work. Colm, I have the pleasure and honour of heading up a department with a ridiculously long title, but a very simple purpose. It is the Department of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science. I like to describe it as a department for the future, a department about talent, and a department about making sure that every individual in Ireland, no matter who they are, where they come from, or what their mum or dad did before them, can reach their full potential. It has to be a department about putting in place pathways and options for people to get to where they want to get to. And it has to be a department that recognizes that we're not all the same, that we don't all learn in the same way, and there isn't a right way or a wrong way of accessing education. There are just different ways. So with that in mind, just a couple of quick things I wanted to touch on. I'm very happy to pick these up in the conversation during the evening. One of the things I'm working on, and we've started this conversation this year, is reforming and broadening the CAO process. I don't think it's right that we live in a country where we pile a ridiculous amount of pressure on people at 17 or 18 to decide what they want to do with the rest of their life. I still don't know what I want to do when I grow up, right? It's perfectly okay for people at 17 or 18 to want to explore their options. So one of the changes we've made this year to the CAO website, for the very first time ever in our history, when students go to cao.ie/options, they don't just see the traditional university options. They also see alongside them options around further education, around training, and around apprenticeships. And I'm traveling around the country. I was in 3 secondary schools today. I've been in about 20 in the last week in 5 counties, talking to Leaving Cert students about looking at all of their options right across the spectrum of further and higher education. The second area is, as you've highlighted, the area of apprenticeships. It is not a coincidence that some of the areas in which we face major challenges as a country are also areas in which we don't have enough people trained. So where I work in the Dáil, every day people stand up and say we must build more houses. If every member of the Dáil came together, they wouldn't build one house between them. We need to make sure we have a situation where we have enough people to meet housing supply, enough electricians, carpenters, plumbers, bricklayers, but also on the climate agenda. We need to have people to help retrofit our homes so that we can actually make our homes more energy efficient and, of course, reduce emissions. So we're putting a big push on apprenticeships. We have a new action plan on apprenticeships, and just a couple of examples of what we want to do. This year, we've put in place an employer grant. So for the first time, the state will pay every employer who takes on an apprentice up to €2,000 per apprentice per year. This is to make it easier for businesses, particularly small businesses, to get involved. The second thing we're doing is telling the public sector to stop lecturing the business community, and it needs to get involved. The public sector employs more than 300,000 people in Ireland. There's no reason in the wide earthly world why every county council, every government department, every state agency can't be giving young and not so young people opportunities through apprenticeships. So setting them a target that they need to take 750 new apprentices a year by 2025, and mapping out how we will break down that 750 by July of this year. Putting in place a specific bursary for female apprentices, again, wanting to diversify the apprenticeship programs, and also rolling out new apprenticeships. So I've mentioned craft apprenticeships, they're so important, but that's not all apprenticeships are about. Do people know you can do a degree in science as an apprentice? You can actually do a master's in engineering as an apprentice. You can become a farm manager, a pub manager, a hairdresser, a beautician, an account technician. You can work in the insurance sector. So we have 62 apprenticeships already in place in Ireland, and 17 more to be developed this year. So that's a big part of our work. On the issue of cost, I do believe the registration fee is too high. We need to drive that down in Ireland, but we also need to make sure the student grant system is fit for purpose. So we've introduced some changes to student grants. I won't go through all the detail now, but making sure more students qualify this year than before, and making sure everyone's student grant is higher than it was before. More to do on that. On the inclusion agenda, Colm, and I don't want to talk for too long, disability issues. We've made good progress as a country in getting people from primary school to secondary school with additional educational needs. One of the big priorities for myself and my department this year is to help more students with a disability transition from second level to third level. And in March, we will publish our new National Access and Inclusion Plan. We live in a country, and we boast rightly that we have a knowledge-based economy, that we have a very well-educated population. All of that is true, but it also hides another truth, that 1 in 5 adults in Ireland can't read, 1 in 4 adults in Ireland struggle with numbers, and 1 in 2 of us don't have digital skills. We need to make a big push on literacy. or we're going to see more people locked out of full economic and societal participation in Ireland. So our new adult literacy plan, it's called Literacy for Life, that will see a coordinator for literacy appointed in each education and training board in Ireland this year. An area where we're also doing well, and Tom Collins has been very involved in this, is technological universities. All roads need not lead to the big cities. We've got to bring higher education into the regions. Good for education access, but also good for driving investment into the regions and for regional development. And the final area, an area that we're not doing that well on, Colm, but I just throw it out there as a topic, and I know there's a lot of work at a European level on this too, the issue of lifelong learning. We need to recognise that the student of tomorrow at third level is not just 18 and just out of school, that they're important. The student of tomorrow may well be 45 with 2 kids, a full-time job and a mortgage, who needs to access education in a flexible and agile way. And how do we better prepare to provide lifelong learning for people? And very final thought, Erasmus, a European programme that you'll know very well. Ireland was one of the founding members of Erasmus. It was an Irish man, Peter Sutherland, as commissioner, who introduced the Erasmus with a Frenchman, Jacques Delors. And so we've been one of the founding members since 1987. 65,000 Irish students have gone abroad on Erasmus. 130,000 students have come to Ireland on Erasmus. We need to make sure we increase the financial support so everybody who wants to participate in Erasmus can, and you can expect to hear some proposals from me on that this year. So that's just a whistle-stop tour of some of the issues that we're working on in terms of the reform agenda. Thank you, Colm.
Thank you very much, Minister. And it's clear I know you said it was a long title with a simple job, but it's a long list of actions you're involved in fairness to it. And I think it's great to see that you've the breadth across them all. And to be fair, I think all of that you mentioned there, just took a list of them. They're all great food for thought in terms of discussion tonight, but equally they're all very important parts of getting the full picture correct. And I suppose next up we have Emer Neville, who, as I said, was the president of the Irish Second Level Students' Union. And I think Emer is, like, often we have left, if you like, the most important person in this whole debate out of it, particularly at second level, is the students. And I think, in fairness to Emer, I know she's a great background in community and voluntary activity, aside from her activity in terms of the Students' Union, but she has been a great voice for second level students. And I have to commend her for that. I'm delighted she took the time to come here tonight because, as I say, it's so important. They're the ones that face the pressures of exams, and they're the ones that ultimately are trying to find the different paths that give them a career into the future, or a life path into the future. And I think, Emer, delighted to hear from you and your perspective from young people in terms of what they see as the way forward in terms of the education system. So, Emer, you have the floor.
Thanks very much, Colm, and to yourself and Minister Harris for your kind words. So I suppose just a bit about the organisation first. My name is Emer. I'm the president or Uachtaráin of the Irish Second Level Students' Union. So we were founded in 2008 and we're the representative body for second level students. So since 2008, we've been working quite heavily with the department and a number of other agencies on, I suppose, what the future of education looks like from that second level perspective. So there are a number of different perspectives that come into this. I suppose the first being the big reform of the Leaving Certificate, and it's something you'll often hear mentioned in media, particularly around times like this when we're discussing different options and you know, different things like that. So I suppose from our perspective and from the perspective of students, you know, the Leaving Cert is branded as this 2-year programme that aims to provide learners, you know, with that broad, balanced education, while also, I suppose, offering them a chance to specialise towards particular higher education and career options. In a recent report, however, that the ISSU did on senior cycle reform, students did not agree that the Leaving Cert achieved this aim. Additionally, you know, the ISSU believes that one of the biggest things that we're seeing is that higher education is becoming increasingly inaccessible, and this is due to, you know, rising costs in rent, tuition, living costs, and a number of other factors. So we've been working with a group called Education Futures to work towards publicly funded higher education, and this is something that the ISSU and many students believe is the way forward. Additionally, as Minister Harris mentioned as well, the SUSI grant, it's something that you know, many students again are seeing as something that is inaccessible, and this is primarily due to the SUSI grant criteria, you know, including but not limited to, you know, the difficulty encountered by students who are working part-time or over the summer, you know, those that are enabled to be classes dependent because they're under 23, and the disparities in the rates, particularly for those living under that 45 kilometre area from their place of study. And these are just a number of different things that students have raised with us about the CESA grant and why they find it inaccessible. So we're currently looking into that as well and conducting a review on that work. And then again, we have the different supports that are in place for students to help them get into third level education that is still quite inaccessible for them. And again, something that we're looking at is the DARE scheme, so the Disability Access Route to Education. This is really inaccessible to students because it's such a long process to fill out, a process that many students actually find very confusing. I believe it's 2 different applications. And something that we believe needs immediate review because of the immense stress that this application can put on students. As well as this, a student very recently actually raised with us that there is a certain complexity with the application processes to institutions with subject requirements for students. So particularly for students with exemptions from subjects such as the Irish requirement for NUIs, the forms are very, very, again, inaccessible to students. Many find them very confusing and can often be a barrier for students when applying to these universities because they're just not able to fill out these forms. They often have to opt for universities where you wouldn't need to have Irish as a subject rather than those where you do. And then finally, I guess something else that we're looking at is Gaeltacht entry routes and the number of entry routes that are there for students from Gaeltacht areas. So what we're really kind of, I suppose, diving in deep to is, the number of Irish medium courses that are available to students, the number of places that are reserved for Gaeltacht entry. And I suppose we're big advocates that the Irish language is the way forward, that we should be really working to revive it, and this can't be done unless we're really providing more access for these students from Gaeltacht areas to really immerse themselves in that language, while also in university. They shouldn't have to travel home to do that. So those are just a number of things that we've been looking into, as well as the reform of the CAO. And we do welcome all the work that's been done on that at the moment with the links to different PLCs, apprenticeships that are now available on the website. Students have really welcomed that, and I think we're really going to see a drive in the number of students that are applying to these options, because they know that those are available to them now, and it's something that we've really been wanting to highlight for students, that the Leaving Cert, it isn't the end all and be all. There are so many different options for you outside of university. I mean, I myself, I'm in a gap year. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I took the year out and I've been able to figure that out. And we're seeing a number of different students looking at the alternative ways, gap years, PLCs, apprenticeships. And it's something that I think they're really starting to welcome. And we're seeing this again through the expansion of the technological universities. More and more universities popping up around the country. It's made higher education more accessible, but there's so much more to do. I suppose those few things that I mentioned are what we're seeing as the way forward from students. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much. And I think, as we said at the start, just introducing you, like to have the voice of students there and to be able to identify all those key issues that are there from the student voice. And equally, the voice speaks back to the students to tell them that the Leaving Cert isn't the only route. And I think that's so important that someone among their peers are telling them that as much as someone of let's say, speaking from a teacher or a different perspective. So thanks very much for joining us, and we'll come back to the questions in a while. Just to say to everybody, if you can put your questions in on the chat, we'll bring them to the 4 panelists once we're finished the 4 introductory remarks, and no doubt we'll get into a good debate at that stage. Third up, we have Owen Patrick Ward. As I said, he's Programme Coordinator at the Access Centre in NUIG, and he's been very central really to educational inclusion is one of the most important things I think we all recognise. If you think back to perhaps previous generations, it was only the elite that got to go to third level colleges and got to, if you like, higher level qualifications. And then probably in more recent times, there was plenty of, if you like, disadvantaged groups or minority groups that still weren't getting access to third level education. So it's brilliant to see the champion that Owen Patrick Ward has been for that, number one. And number two, also how he's created, if you like, the Sanctuary Scholarship Programme in NUIG, and also has headed up the Access Centre as well. So Over to you, Owen Patrick. Perhaps you'll talk a little bit about, I suppose, the inclusion side, but also just your perspectives as a whole on the education system.
Yeah, so Colm, I have to say you're after really giving me an ego boost there, because you have to give me a few titles that I have not done at all. My boss will not be happy to hear that I'm the head of the Access Centre. No, I'm part of a very strong team, and at the Access Centre here at NUI Galway. In addition to that, particularly around the University Century Initiative, I was one of a strong member of team. Again, it just shows you the importance of collaborative approach and everybody getting a fair chance and a fair opportunity to be at the table, and particularly students, and having their voice heard. For me, I'm here today. I know Simon, the minister, would know of my own story. I'm an Irish traveller myself. I come from a family of 8. Both my parents were born on the side of the road. I was an early school leaver. I've never sat my junior cert. I've never sat my leaving cert. I left school at 16. I went on into further education. I never completed a program in further education. So I was really a very bad candidate to go to university. But however, I was persistent, and I took the opportunity that was available, and that for me was the Access program at NUI Galway. So I did that, and to make a long story short, that I got an honours in my degree, and I ended up going from an early school leaver, never sitting junior cert to leaving cert, to becoming a post-primary secondary school teacher, teaching in school. So for me, that was from the power of the opportunities that are available, and for one who it gets the correct scaffolding of support. I know that works. I've seen it. I've lived it. And I know every day with me and our team here at the Access Centre, we see lives changed by people getting those opportunities. But I suppose one thing that, I would agree with Minister Harris. Minister would know I took up a new post in August, and I particularly focus, I've created a new program. It's called Minkers Missing in Education. So I'm working very closely out in the community with 5 traveller organisations. We're focusing on Sligo, Mayo, and Galway, and we've created part-time positions that work out into the community to look at how we can support people to overcome these barriers and how they can progress into higher education. But for one thing that kind of comes back to me, and I agree, I would be agreeing with the reforms around the CEO, and particularly this year, I really welcomed that the FET and the apprentice route was involved, was included in the CEO. But for me, one group that I seems to kind of just be amiss sometimes in these conversations is around the students who are the Leaving Cert applied. This is becoming, for the last 2 or 3 years, it kind of comes up time and time again for me, and particularly how they're struggling to progress into either a further education course or into higher education. So I'll give you an example. If we have students and we look at last year, we had 61,000 approximately students who sit the state exam. So that was a leaving certificate, or they set the Leaving Cert applied, and about approximately 3,200 of those were LCA students. Now, when you do your Leaving Cert, you come out with a level 5. So you have 2 options. You can go in and apply to the CEO, and hopefully you get your place if you're lucky, or there's other routes, obviously the further education routes, but then you have the School Leavers program, and you can apply to one of the School Leavers Access program that will give you the opportunity. Then if you meet the criteria from a socioeconomic disadvantaged background, you'll be able to get your place, and if you're successful on that, you're guaranteed your place in university. However, if you're an LCA student and you come out and you complete your LCA, you are at level 4. So you have to do a PLC. Now, I agree with that. That is good as well, and I understand that's another pathway. However, this is where it gets problematic for me. You cannot get a place on an access program, School Leavers Access program, at a level 4. That's a serious barrier. I'd like to see more work done in that area. Why is it that their LCA students level 4, why can work not be done around that, where we can make a transition from LCA right into the School Leavers Access program, where they can get the scaffolding and support that already exists, but just bring the 2 together and give them those wraparound support and have a smooth transition across into higher education. I know that when I did the Access program, and I'm not the only one, I've met a lot of people. It's 10 or 12 years since I've done the Access program. I went in as somebody that was out of education for 10 years. So I had to start from scratch. And it was that scaffolding support, that model, it worked for me. And I'm very fortunate that, so they're a group that I would have, I'd like to see some work on done, and particularly definitely reform in that area. And in addition to that as well, I'm a lover of data. I love data, and I love segregated data, and I love the need for ethnic identifiers as well, to be able to, we need to go back and we need to be able to track students, not just, we need to see what group of students, who we're dealing with, and how are they progressing right through the system. I am aware as well, and I have to give the minister credit, he's doing a lot of great work in these areas. I'm aware of a lot of work he's done around COVID-19, particularly around disadvantaged groups, travellers. The laptop loan scheme was one of the, I thought that was an absolute brilliant idea. I've seen the impact on it. At NUI Galway, we gave out over 800 laptops last year on a laptop loan scheme. I see it on a day-to-day basis and the impact it has. But for me, as everybody would know, equality, diversity, inclusion is so important. And I like that we are moving and we're having these conversations that we need to have. And we have a lot of good work to be done. But particularly, I suppose, for me tonight, I would like to see some work done around the LCA students and how we can make a smooth transition, that at least that they be able to apply to an access program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Owen Patrick. And to be fair, I think you walked the journey that we talked so many others showed, like in terms of not walking straight out of second levels into third level, we'll say, with so many points for third level, and you've come around a different path and got there nonetheless. And I think that's a message for all of us. I myself actually went straight out of second level to go home to farm, so I can fully relate with not necessarily getting the points to get you into third level, or maybe being isolated, if you like, on a different road you might take down after you leave secondary school. So we move now on to Professor. I suppose the last, at the younger end of the spectrum, certainly in Emer's case, has all the future ahead of her. Tom in Collins has a lifetime of experience in the education system. There's no doubt about it. He particularly at third level, where he's been, if you like, the head of a number of the colleges and has brought sweeping change in the different ones he was involved in. And anyone I speak to, because I would have contacts in the various different colleges, always speak well of Tom and the contribution he made in the leadership roles he held. So I'll leave it to him to tell you further for a little bit of insight, and someone that knows the education and its failing systems over the years, what we maybe need to do to really address them and bring it to a new generation. Tom.
Thanks, Colm, and thank you for the introduction and for organising tonight. It's a great pleasure to be here with the Minister, with Emer and with Owen Patrick, and a great opportunity for me to learn what's going on. And as you indicate, I'm much more comfortable talking about the past than the future. So I'll mention a few things. I was reminded when Owen Patrick was talking about accessing higher education without going through the usual route. One of my jobs in my time in Maynooth, where we did a lot of work on access back in the early days when you really brought people into college under cover of darkness in many instances who weren't supposed to be there. We used to interview mature year applicants. They had to go through a kind of a cleansing process before we took them in. And I remember interviewing a potential student, and the minister will know this bit of history, I'm sure. This student had instead of going to secondary school, had spent 3 years camping in a tree on the Glen of the Downs, protesting at the new motorway that was going to cut through the Glen of the Downs. So he had missed out a few critical junctures in his examination pathway, such as the junior cert and the leaving cert. But I assured him that I was pretty convinced he learned more sitting on a tree in the Glen of the Downs for 3 years than he would ever have learned in a school. So we took him in, and he hasn't looked back since. And this, of course, is part of, the minister referred to lifelong learning. Part of what's magical about lifelong learning is that and we've known this for years, that mature students, i.e. students over the age of 23 who come into university, invariably do better than their counterparts who come straight in from secondary school, regardless of whether these mature students have any secondary level education or not. And I think this is actually important, because I do not believe that outcomes in second level education determine outcomes in third. I think if a child or an adult finds the course they want to do and are motivated to do it, whatever it is, the likelihood is they will succeed in it. And for me, well, first of all, I should say, I only have only 5 minutes now, so I want to be careful how I use those 5 minutes. I'm hugely conscious of the fact that in working, especially over the years with adults, regardless of what level of academic achievement they have attained in their lives, and with colleagues, academics I worked most of my life in Maynooth. I spent 5 years in Dundalk IT. The great majority of adults I've ever met will usually recall how in school they come out of it with a strong sense of what they were not good at. And many adults will, I've often wondered if they've ever recovered from their experience of early life schooling. The experience of diminishment or of sense of being a failure, or in some cases, being ridiculed. I am fascinated that if you look at The Simpsons, you realize that in America, it's still okay to mock those who are poorly educated. You don't mock anybody else. But The Simpsons are actually about the educated looking at the poorly educated and feeling they can mock those. So a society that is not just decides that there are groups that shouldn't be educated, but feels free to mock them is in a dangerous path. Now, in fairness, I think Ireland has never gone there. It has always been highly sophisticated in this. But I think in the States and also in the UK, the emergence since Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher of great swathes of poorly educated people, many from traditional industrial working class backgrounds, has underpinned the great crisis of both civilizations and of both societies that both of them are now confronting. And so I cannot overstate the significance of the decision to create the new department that the minister has referred to, and to appoint a minister with responsibility for it. Because actually, I genuinely believe that so much of modern Ireland, if we look at its understanding, for instance, of vaccination, its understanding of Europe, its readiness to engage in a critical way with the forces of globalization, these are capacities which are part of the Irish culture, which in my view, the US and the UK have both lost. And I attribute both of that to education. It has always interested me that in I looked at these figures some time back. In the year 1800, there were a total of 200 nuns in Ireland. By 1860, there were 8,000 nuns in Ireland. And by 1960, there were 18,000. And today, there are still about 7,000. Now, they did many things wrong, as we know. But probably one thing they also did was they educated working class poor girls to become educated mothers. And Ireland has had educated mothers for decades. We didn't do as well with fathers, interestingly, but in a way that never mattered very much. We have a lot of evidence now that says the education of the mother is the critical factor in the education of children. I'm just going to make two other observations. I've been hugely impressed by the interaction between Emer and her group with the relevant departments of education as they manage COVID. I have come around to the view that the Leaving Cert, the second level reform, is really difficult for many reasons. But the primary reason is that the third level won't let it do its own job. And the fact is that third level sees second level as the place where it harvests its students. And guidance counsellors are the recruitment sergeants for the third level. And in the Leaving Cert year, the guidance counsellors, they're so dedicated and they're committed, and I know them well. There is probably few subsectors within the teaching profession more dedicated to good outcomes for the students. But their primary focus is on what are you going to fill out in that CAO form. I personally have now come around to the view that the only fair CAO system is a lottery. If I grew up in north of the River Liffey in Dublin, there are really only two areas that I would look at, are only two areas where if I want to become a medical doctor, I can, if I grow up in Hove, Sutton, or in Castleknock, that's a possibility. But otherwise, it's largely not going to happen. So I do think I was part, which the Minister very generously referred to, of the debate on access in Ireland in the late 20th century and the early years of this century. I think the new debate on access is not just going to be how do you get into third level, but actually it's going to be how do you get into the course you want to get into in third level, and how do you get into the institution you want to get into in third level. And I don't believe the Leaving Cert is the way to do that. I equally don't believe that it's good for the Leaving Cert, that that's what it has to do. Because I think if it was freed of that responsibility, then it could do some really interesting things. But if its primary focus is on the points at the as the outcome of the Leaving Cert, it's never going to be able to focus, I think, on education, which education should be, as a joy, as an opening of minds, as a delight in the possibility of youth. And I do think it could still do that, but for that to happen, it has to free itself from that huge challenge, which actually is relatively recent, that the point system was introduced. We've tried to amend it several times, but it has never worked. And I don't think it'll ever work until it's actually decided. It does some things well, but if equity is what we're about, it will never do that. Because the child from a disadvantaged background will be disadvantaged. No matter what we do lots of really good work with DESH schools, with access programs, with all kinds of supplementary efforts. But really, if I'm a child growing up in a corporation housing estate, I have a better chance of getting into medicine if my name is in a lottery than I have if I'm going to do the Leaving Cert. And I think that's a big issue and a big challenge on the equity debate. So my final point, I like to look at second level reform in terms of three things. And I think they're three separate things, but we tend to conflate the three of them. There is the certification question, i.e. prove you did the Leaving Cert, prove you've completed the senior cycle. That's what certification does. The assessment bit is prove you've done it in a particular way, that you've met standards. And the progression bit is on the back of that, you move on. If you can separate those three things, you gain enormous freedom in the approach to second level. And I think you might actually create interesting routes out of it. I've mentioned medicine several times tonight. Medicine, of course, started as an apprenticeship. J.H. Newman, his very fundamental idea of a university, he did not consider that medicine was an appropriate discipline to be in a university. He thought it was a craft and should be done in any context other than a university. I leave it at that, Colm. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. And thanks again to all four speakers for their contributions. I'm conscious that the Minister perhaps has somewhere to go, so I might come to him with a couple of the questions to start with. I think a constant theme that's been through it all, even the contributions from all speakers, has been about, I suppose, one, about inclusion, about the fact that it's so important to include people that haven't been included previously, and also then the fit for purpose nature of the Leaving Cert. So I don't know, Minister, if you want to make a comment on both of them, whether you feel there is a need for change with the Leaving Cert or how we can, I suppose, change the system.
Yeah.
For one thing, to make it more, the opportunity is more for people, but also to include everybody, that everyone gets the opportunity.
No, thank you very much, Colm. I do want, I'd like to make a comment on both those things. I mean, look, just firstly on the access point, let's in looking to bring about change and make more progress, let's acknowledge the huge progress this country has made on access to third level education over the last couple of generations. So I'm bringing forward a piece of law at the minute, and it replaces the 1971 law. So I went back and looked at what was the situation in 1971. In 1971, there were about 20,000 students in higher education in Ireland. Today, 2022, there's well over 250,000 full-time students in higher education. So we've gone from 20,000 to 250,000 in 50 years, right? And that's not a political point, it's a societal point. It's the progress we have made as a people over the last number of years. But of course, lies in statistics. What that does mask is the reality that that progress has not been equal across all sectors of our society. Now, we have made progress across pretty much every sector of society. So there are more students from disadvantaged backgrounds now in higher education than ever before. The progression rate from a DESH school to a third level institution is higher now than it was in recent years, but it's not higher at the same rate. It's not equal. And there is still a way to go to level the playing pitch. And I'm very struck by Tom's comments. I must say I could have listened to you all evening, because I think you're entirely right. I mean, there is still a postcode lottery, and there are still real socioeconomic blockages and disadvantages in relation to participation in third level. And people like Owen Patrick have been doing incredible work on this. We need to do more. So what are we going to do on access? We're going to actually start setting targets that are meaningful and challenging. We've exceeded all our targets in the National Access Plan pretty much. That doesn't suggest to me we should tap ourselves on the back. It suggests to me the targets were too easy to meet, right? So I think we need to actually set ourselves some very demanding targets in our new National Access and Inclusion Plan, backed by real money, that we will put in place in March. I think we have to look at specific groups of students or sectors of our student population that are not progressing. One that concerns me greatly are still students with disabilities. I'm still concerned about that. I'm still concerned about female participation rates in a number of subject areas, including STEM, but also in apprenticeships. So we need to take affirmative action, if you like, positive actions there to make a real difference. On the Leaving Cert debate, and I'm going to wade straight into it. I mean, what the Leaving Cert does, it does well. The Leaving Cert measures a student's ability in a certain subject, and then how the student can, relay that information in a rote exam. It does that well. Do I believe, as the Minister for Third Level Education, that is the fairest way or the best way of deciding progression to third level? I do not. I fundamentally do not. And the reason I don't is, there could be two students sitting side by side in a class today. One could make an absolutely brilliant nurse, and one might not make such a good nurse, but the one who mightn't make such a good nurse could be an awful lot better at the rote learning and could perform better in the exam, and that person will get into the university today and the other student won't. Now, at the moment, the way I'm coming at it is by trying to go around the back of the scrum, by trying to show the student who doesn't necessarily get where they want to on the Leaving Cert place that the PLC route and the further education route can still get you there. But I'd like to see us go further than that. Why is it that at 23 years of age, lots of the requirements that you would meet at 18 disappear? Why is it at 23 years of age? What is magical about the number 23? Nothing. What is the difference between a student at 22 and 11 months and 23? Nothing. These are arbitrary decisions taken by our universities over the year, and they need to be challenged in the 21st century. So what I intend to do is firstly, do what the sector's been waiting for a long, long time, is try to settle the question about what sustainable funding for higher education looks like, get our hands on the additional funding that the sector needs. But in return for that additional funding, open up a conversation with the sector about reform. And that has to be about how there can be more flexible pathways into third level. And I've been running out of paper trying to write down the variety of ideas that I've heard already from speakers tonight. So leaving cert reform, yes, but I'm less concerned about that. I'm more concerned about the pathways from school to third level, which I don't think should be solely based on any one examination process.
And just to follow on from that, Minister, I see Maria Murphy has a question here about why we rush people from second level into third level. Do we not, like, they've no, let's say, work experience or life work experience, and maybe they're taking on a course but they've no experience on it. Like in that topic of kind of alternative routes, where do you see the role for, let's say, postponing going into third level, or what do you see, like, where would you advise students in that regard?
So, and thank you, Maria, for the question. I mean, I don't think there's anything at all wrong, and I say this every time I speak to secondary school students, there's nothing wrong with the concept of effectively a transition year or gap year after second level education. And what I say to students about further education and training is it can be a really good way of effectively having a transition year after school. It can be good for a load of reasons further out, but it can be, if you don't know at 17 what you want to do for the next 4 years of your life, don't rush to college to drop out in November or December. Actually say, I'm going to take that year, I'm going to stay engaged in education, of course I am, but I'm going to continue to find out my options and try taster courses, if I may describe them as that. So for the student who doesn't know whether they want to do a law degree, they think they might want to do a law degree, but they're not certain as to whether they want to do a law degree. Why not actually do what we call pre-law? Do a year in the local college of further education, get a grounding in law, see if it's for you before you take the plunge. And, you know, in your own constituency column, I have a real life example of this. I've met Jack, a young man from Cavan. Jack wasn't sure what he wanted to do. Jack went and did a year of pre-law in Cavan Institute of Further Education, and Jack is now in his first year law degree in Maynooth University. So I couldn't agree more. Like, and that's one of the main reasons we changed the CAO website, was to try and have that conversation of, yes, go for the university route, absolutely, go for the CAO. If that's for you, go for it right now. But if it's not for you right now, for a whole load of reasons, there are other ways of progressing your education, and there are other ways of getting to where you want to. And it's absolutely okay to take a deep breath and not know what you want to do at 17. And I do think, and I don't think this is out of badness, but I do think culturally, we've arrived at a point where there can be a bit of elitism or almost a cultural snobbery around what success is. You know, and, you know, I often find that the conversation is, which university do you want to go to, rather than what do you want to do with the rest of your life? And here are the 4 or 5 or 6 different ways of actually getting there. So we have to broaden this conversation, because the narrow conversation, and I'll shut up after this, Colm, but the narrow conversation has actually resulted in real skills shortages. The narrow conversation is one of the reasons when you pick up the phone tomorrow to get a plumber, you might have to wait a few days or a few weeks. If you want to put an extension on the house, you'll be on a waiting list. If you want to retrofit your home, I heard an expert say today, you could wait at least 3 months. We've funneled everybody through what we have perceived to be the lens of success, rather than actually recognizing that success is much broader than any one pathway.
And Minister, and I'll put this to all the panel because I'm conscious it's everybody's involvement. But is there an educational snobbery in the country in terms of everyone wants to, is it the parents that are the problem in part of this, that everyone wants their boy or their girl to go to third level and get the wonderful qualification and don't necessarily respect the other roles? Is that something we have to address? I'll come to you first, Minister, but I'll go to all 4 on this.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think parents are doing what every parent will do, what I will do for my children, what everyone wants to do. We're doing what's best for our children, right? That's 100% what parents are doing, wanting the best for their child. But we have to empower ourselves as parents and our students, our children, to have all of the information. And I do think, and I feel very strongly about this, I do think this focus solely on the CAO, which is the first change I made was the website. You might say, he's harping on about changing a website. What bloody difference does a website make? The reason I did it was I wanted when a son or a daughter sat down with their mum or their dad around the couch, around the kitchen table, on the couch with their teacher, I wanted them, when they're having that conversation about the CAO and they're taking out the website, I wanted them to realize that the conversation can have lots of parts, not just the CAO piece. So like I am a minister for higher education. I want everybody who wants to go to university to be able to go to university. I want everybody to be able to fulfill their dreams, but I don't want people to feel that the only way of them succeeding in life is that, because what does happen is, apart from the stress and anxiety it puts on young people, we also see just a massive dropout rate, where students think they're doing one thing, they think they're signing up to a course, and then they turn up and realize, actually, that course wasn't exactly what I thought it was. So that's where, to Maria's point, that gap year can be a piece. So it's about empowering, I guess, Colm. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Emer, just on that, do you think that there's, like, people have a very set notion of what education is, and perhaps particularly, let's say, parents have a kind of what they want for their children, maybe don't actually put the children at the center of it, or the students, should I say, at the center of it in the first place? What's your sense of it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I do think that, we'll say, education snobbery is something that is quite prevalent in our country. You'll often hear the conversations around the CAO. It's never, what you want to study, whether that's an apprenticeship or a PLC or university, but it's where are you going? What university are you going to? You'll very often hear, or you'll never really often hear the likes of PLCs or apprenticeships mentioned in those conversations. And it goes right down to the schools. It's not just in households. It's the very same with certain guidance counsellors, where they're not presenting these options to students. And again, it's why the ISSU would believe that the addition of the FET courses and apprenticeships on the CAO website will really benefit students, because they're actually able to see these options when they're not being presented to them in the classroom and on that grassroots level. I think we really need to be restructuring our conversations around higher education and the different pathways when we're discussing things like this with students. It should never be, what university are you going to go to, what university course you want to apply to. It should be, what do you want to do when you finish your second level education, and we should be presenting each and every option that is available to students, whether that is a gap year, like was mentioned, whether that is a PLC, an FET course, an apprenticeship. There are a number of other options. Students can go abroad and work for a year. We see that done a lot as well. There's also international opportunities, going and studying somewhere outside of Ireland into the EU, and there's options for students in other countries as well. It's not just you have to go and you have to study in this one university in Ireland and you have to do this specific course to be successful, because that's just not the case.
And in many ways, what you're saying, are like it's taking the pressure off people at the Leaving Cert as well, when they recognise there are the other options. And I think that's very important. Owen, do you feel, from your perspective, do you think it's something that, say, we need to address, or how can we address it, I suppose, is the most important thing. It's one thing to identify it. How do we address this snobbery?
Yeah, I suppose, Colm, for me, I kind of, the majority of students who I work with, myself personally, would be first generation going into university. So I kind of would have maybe an opposite kind of an experience then, you know what I mean? So where I would find I have to support, me and my team here at Anywhere I Go, we support the student, but also we support the family too, and we support the teacher with that around. We have to have a whole broad, so along with working one-to-one with the student and educating them about different pathways and supports, and obviously we're getting support in the schools, but we also have to educate the family too around that and what different pathways are available. So for me, it's quite the opposite, but I would agree.
Yeah, but that whole scenario where people are first generation and there's no culture of it in the family, it's so important to put that structure, around people, and it's worked very effectively.
Yeah, it's working quite well for me. I always say I'm supporting the students, but also the families. You know what I mean? So that's again going back to that wraparound scaffolding of support, and it's working. Every student that I meet is different, but we always have that conversation with the parents. So I am aware of what's been outlined, but for me, on my day-to-day basis, I'd be on the opposite.
But surely you represent the success of addressing the issue, and that's the point. That the work that you're doing is addressing what was traditionally a problem, and clearly it's more of what you're doing is what's needed to bridge that gap and to make those opportunities available to a whole different cohort of people.
That's true, I suppose, yeah. But I suppose I'm only one of a team. I have to very. I stand. You know, I have a very strong team behind me. You know, career guidance teachers and all that. But I would be aware that it's very, very important. The work that I do and we do is very, very important to that cohort of students. And we are helping those. We're empowering. Again, what the minister said, it's all about empowering. But for me, it's empowering the student, but also empowering the family to support that student as they progress on.
Yeah, Tom, you've seen. Yeah, I suppose you've seen the transition to what Owen is talking about people and more effectively now than maybe in previous times. Have you any insights as to how we can continue to do that more effectively?
Well, I think it is important to reflect on what the minister has said. 2 points: that everybody wants the best for their kids, and that's a wonderful thing. You always want that to be the case. And the other thing is we have done really well in higher education in Ireland at relatively inexpensively, interestingly. You know, we're Minister mentioned funding. The sector, I think, gives good value for money in Ireland at the moment, in fairness to it. So it's really important to say that we have a transition from second to third level now, more than 66%. It's was certainly the highest in the OECD. So I really do want to mark our achievements. How we would do it better? I suppose my fundamental point is that if people are motivated in the correct way, they will succeed in pretty much any course that they find themselves on in a university if they're accepted onto it. And I haven't, as I said earlier, the continuous story in my time in Maynooth was the outstanding performers were mature students. I once ran a program in Kilkenny where a student had spent his life working as a draper's assistant in Kilkenny and graduated from Maynooth with a PhD in history on the Irish horse in the Second World War. In the First World War. So there's this extraordinary talent in everybody. And I think you'd love to make sure that the system gave people that opportunity instead of blocking them at some arbitrary point, as the minister has said, when they're sitting the Leaving Cert. I think the change in the website is hugely important. We are in a social media generation. That message is critically important to people. That sitting there with HE is FE. I do think we need to make specific efforts to get disadvantaged people, and by that I would mean people excluded from mainstream, and they would include, traditional, perhaps working class people, but also ethnic groups and now new migrant groups. Very important that they are not precluded from entry into key professions. And key professions, I think in particular, are teaching, the healthcare professions, hugely, because these are role models for their own cohort. Now, there's a really interesting work going on in the return to teaching opportunities through PATH programs in a number of the Irish universities. I think that's really important. So I would like to think that there are quotas for disadvantaged or non-traditional learners in all professions. The most important being, I think, medicine, because I think medicine is the kind of standard bearer that every child's Leaving Cert results are how many points were you away from getting medicine. So I think it's really important to break that.
And it's probably true in saying that.
No, go ahead.
Pick the best doctor. So I was just saying, it's probably true to say that the highest points doesn't make the best doctor necessarily.
No, I recall being at a guidance, meeting guidance council when my own daughter was doing her leaving cert. And the guidance counsellor in the school saying that he did his leaving cert in the 1960s. And six students from his class went on to do medicine and veterinary, all qualified, and none of them had an honour in the leaving cert. So there is, and we've created a narrative that these are somehow complicated professions that only an elite can actually succeed in. Only an elite get onto them. But I think most people could succeed.
And can
I just come in here?
And just to take it back to the second level, just a question there from Aoife.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to that Tom come up with there, which I thought was quite relevant, you know, particularly around the migrant groups and ethnic minorities, which would include Trevor and Roma too. And about, you know, the most powerful role models are the ones that are in the classroom, you know, getting into teaching professions, but also into medicine. And I agree 100%. I've worked for students from ethnic minorities who had a lot of work and lost out in 1 point. I've witnessed that this year, 1 point for a medical program. But I do believe that, I suppose, the government has to step up as well when it comes to employment and diversifying the teaching staff and diversifying these professions, and acknowledge the other barriers that those from ethnic minorities, once they come through the system and they've gone through third level, the difficulties that they face of actually securing employment in these professions, you know. So we can have all the initiatives you want to in schools, and that I firmly believe, I've witnessed it myself, but if you have a teacher from an ethnic minority or a socioeconomic disadvantaged background, I was born in a council estate as well, and raised in it. I've long been a traveller. So that is the most powerful thing that you have in a room, you know. So I think that the government needs to do that as well around diversifying and creating sustainable pathways into employment. You know, again, as the Minister touched on earlier, the public service, I suppose, public sector is one of the biggest employers nearly in the state. You know, so there's a lot of avenues there. I'd like to see that some more work done on that.
Well, you mentioned, I'll come to Emer as well, around, like, if you like, peer role models in terms of younger people that they can relate, that student can relate to, of their own generation or maybe a couple of years ahead of them, that maybe can go into classrooms or go into second level and show people the different routes there. Do you think there's enough of that, Emer, in terms of people that students relate to, of their own sort of profile, that can be an inspiration for them for the different types of roles, be it even in the apprenticeships or in the taking the year out as you did, or take time to think? Do you think there's a lot more thought needs to be put in people like yourself to go back into the classroom and talk to people and explain that there are other ways?
Absolutely, and I think it's an initiative that should really be taken up on. You know, we often see really great campaigns such as like College Awareness Week, where you would see a lot of, let's say, influencers going into classrooms and discussing their own pathways and how they, I suppose, made it to university, to an apprenticeship, or to whatever option they chose. And something, you know, that I would really encourage students to do is take that initiative, reach out to current students. It's something I did myself when I was researching different universities this year. I reached out to a student that was in a course that I was quite interested in, and I just asked. We organised a Zoom call and we just sat down and had a discussion about the course. And I think in particular, it could really help with, say, some of the dropout rates that we're seeing, because you're sitting down with the current student, you're getting that information that you won't find in a prospectus or on the college website. You know, you're getting that real life experience. And I think, you know, until we are seeing, you know, more peer mentorship schemes and the likes, I think, you know, students reaching out and kind of helping each other and through these kind of difficult decisions and figuring out what way they want to go in life. I think it's a really good thing that students can do and just to help each other out and you know, have that relationship. But I do think that we need to be looking at the likes of peer mentorship in schools and furthering initiatives such as College Awareness Week to really strengthen those relationships with students.
And just to come back to some of the questions there, Aoife talked about she has a 14-year-old son who, if you like, is very creative, but getting very challenged to actually stay within the education system that's there and to look at alternative routes. I suppose when you look at all these that Thomas said, at 23 people come back and they're, if you like, they have a bigger appetite maybe for education at that stage. Minister, do you feel there's a way of different path for engaging, let's say, second level students to keep them involved and maybe come back into a third level college at course at a later stage?
I do, and unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave in a moment because I had to be somewhere at 7:45, but I was enjoying the conversation. But just I'm delighted you asked me this question because I think it's an important one, and thank you, Aoife, for raising it. And I see some commentary around it in the chat as well. I mean, I think Youth Reach is a gem that we have within our education system that we don't put up in lights. It's called second chance education. I hate that phrase. I think it's completely wrong. I'd like to get rid of it because it's actually just, again, another way for people to complete their school education for whom school doesn't work. And for a whole variety of reasons, school doesn't work for some people. And I have visited, between virtually and in person, I'd say I've visited at least 15 to kind of 20 Youth Reach centres over the last while. Every time I go to a county, I make a point of visiting a Youth Reach centre. It is absolutely transformational when you find a student who has had a really difficult experience in school for a variety of reasons, not apportioning blame, and who has been effectively rebuilt and supported to fulfil their goals, to get the Leaving Cert if that's what they want to do, or the Leaving Cert applied, or to get onto a PLC or an apprenticeship, or to get to college. It's absolutely transformational. So while at 14, I think it's too young for Youth Reach. I think it's 16 at the moment. I'd encourage Aoife to check that out. I'd also think Youth Reach is something that should perhaps actually come in a little bit earlier, but Youth Reach is an incredible resource and it's available in every county in Ireland, and we should be shouting about it from the rooftops and really shining a spotlight on it. It can be the difference for a student managing to get through the education system or not. And Colm, would you?
Thanks, Dan. Absolutely, I appreciate the time you've taken, and it's great to have your perspective on it because you really are a minister that relates to the students, perhaps more than some have in the past. And I think you've done a great job, and hopefully you'll continue. And the whole reform, and particularly showing people that there's other options. The point that it takes the pressure off them for the Leaving Cert is so important. I think.
No, thank you so much, and thank you for organising tonight. And I've learned a lot from both the questions and the contributions, and I'll follow up with your office after. And thank you everybody for their time this evening too. See you soon.
Perfect. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Minister.
And just can we continue on that one, I suppose, if we come to you, Emer, just on it, I suppose, in relation to like them second level students who feel the system isn't for them, and maybe like Thomas pointed out that people to come back to the system at a later stage may actually be more engaged at that stage. What do you feel the route is for colleagues of yours that are struggling, let's say, to be engaged by the academic curriculum?
And firstly, just to echo everything that Minister Harris did say, Youth Reach Centres are absolutely incredible. And we actually changed the name of our organisation a few years ago from secondary students to second level so that we could actually include Youth Reach Centres. And it was very important that they also had a union advocating for them. So we really would encourage students, if they are finding themselves disengaged from education, to reach out to Youth Reach Centres. The work they do is magnificent. And again, I do think, you know, if you're in education and you just it's not working for you at that stage, you can always go back. And whether that is back to a higher level as a mature student, whether that is re-engaging in education at a different time, it's always going to be there for you. And I think that's really important to note that, you know, sometimes you're in education and it's just not working and you just don't want to be there. And that's okay. It's more than okay. You can always go back. It's not going to go anywhere. It'll be there when you're ready to engage in it. So, you know, I think what we'd really say to students is just do it when you're ready. Do it when you're ready to engage. You know, and when you are ready to engage, it's really going to benefit you. But again, just to echo what Minister Harris said on the Youth Reach Centres, like I couldn't put it better myself. He really did explain them quite well. We would really encourage people to reach out to them as well.
Owen, any thoughts on that? With the system, particularly in the earlier stages of second level.
Can you repeat the question? Apologies.
Yeah. No, just in terms of, let's say, younger people, teenagers at second level who are struggling. There was a parent there spoke about the idea that she had a 14-year-old son and that he was very creative, but he was struggling in school in terms of being engaged by the, if you academic nature of the curriculum. Is there anything you see that?
I suppose first thing you'd have, like looking back on my own background. Yeah, looking back on my own background, you know, secondary school, the model didn't work for me. You know, it didn't work for me. I didn't feel like I belonged in it. While I was academically strong, was I engaged all the time? I don't really know. You know, I was kind of floating through, but I did become a school leaver. And further education model didn't work for me either. So I firmly believe that if with the correct support, that you would be able to find the right program, the right support for everybody, you know. And I've seen it happen myself. Like the Access program, it worked for me. I work full-time within the university, but I'm also doing a PhD as well. So it can happen. So for me, I'm a firm believer that we all learn differently, and we all need different models, different modes, different pathways, different supports. And I do firmly believe that if we get, you know, the proper supports that we need, then that we can flourish in education.
Yeah. Just moving on, I suppose, to further, I see a question here in relation to the STEM subjects and getting more women involved in the STEM subjects. I don't know if anyone want to jump in, or anyone in particular. Maybe, well, Emer, perhaps you should take in terms of how you can engage, get the ladies more engaged with the STEM. It's a constant theme that comes up. I don't know if you have any thoughts on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as a woman that wants to go into STEM myself, it's definitely something I'm very passionate about. And it's something that, as an organisation, the ISSU has been doing quite a lot of work on this year. And in particular, you know, with International Women's Day coming up as well, and there are a number of initiatives being launched around the country. I think, you know, in terms of supporting young women going into STEM, we're seeing lots of scholarships being introduced to different universities, to further support young women progressing towards those options. We're also seeing a number of different EU initiatives coming up around the country as well. So I think, you know, the supports to get more women into STEM, they're definitely increasing. They're not quite there yet, but we are seeing a massive growth in that area. And I think just, you know, as a young woman, I would really encourage more women to look at their options and to go into STEM. I think it's a really beneficial area, and it needs more young female voices in it. We're seeing a lot of inequalities in that area. And that's because, you know, there's just not enough women in STEM. And I think the best way to counteract that is to better support young women going into STEM, which we're seeing massive growth in, and to just encourage and empower young women in that area. So I would really encourage anyone and everyone to look at their options, have a bit of a research into the different opportunities that are there for young women. And something the ISSU are doing to support this is we're building a third level hub on our website to ensure that all scholarships in the country are outlined clearly for students, and they're all in one accessible place. And there will be a specific section, hopefully, on this for STEM related scholarships, and having that resource for students and young women looking to go into that area. And as well as that, just, you know, really go for it. Reach out to other students that are in that area, figure out if it's the option you want to go towards, and if it is, just put your best foot forward and give it a go. Again, you know, there are multiple scholarships and different supports out there, but all it takes is, you know, one young woman stepping forward to do it, and that's another woman that we have in STEM. So the more women we can get doing it, the better.
Tom, have you any thoughts on that?
Well, clearly we need to break down all gender-based stereotyping and access to programs and courses. I think everything that's done in breaking down gender stereotypes is hugely desirable. I suppose I would say the biggest picture around education disadvantage in Ireland is actually working class boys. And that's not to in any way understate the importance of every initiative we can dream up to deal with gender stereotyping. But I once chaired the NCCA, and back from 2006, 2012, in that time, we conducted a longitudinal survey of students entering second level and looked at their progress through second level. And we found that in second year, in second level, was a critical moment in the career of a second level student at about 14 years old, that 25% of the cohort essentially turned off education at that age. The two main subjects that turned off on, if that's not a contradiction in terms, were Irish and mathematics. But the group that was most susceptible to essentially going through the kind of pattern that Owen's already described at a personal level of disenchantment with education was young working class boys. And that is actually a group that you neglect at your cost in the world of education. It's obviously costly for them in terms of career opportunities, life chances, and all the kinds of things that a higher education creates in terms of their opportunities and further education. But
also for society.
It also, you will find that group, and what we found in the NCCA work was they never came back. That at 14, they turned off. And there was, certainly in second level, they may have come back in their 20s, but they didn't come back in second level. So that is a cohort which presents a massive challenge in second level education in Ireland. And many, yeah, go ahead, Colm, sorry.
Yeah, I just put it to three, and yourself and Owen as well, in terms of that cohort, and is there a thing that they, if you like, they're looking for more physical or active kind of activities that maybe the apprenticeship type route might go? And I suppose just to take that question one step further, is there a need then to tie the apprenticeship back into the formal education at a later stage, a bit like what you referred to earlier, where students, like, if you like, at 23 or 4 are more engaged with an academic course, haven't got the practical experience that might bring them back into it? I suppose if you could just maybe something on that, Tom, and I'll come to Owen on the same point.
Yeah, in the NCCA work that was done at the time, they found for almost all students, courses they liked doing involved some kind of an applied nature. So they included things like wood technology, what's it now called? It used to be called mechanical drawing, but it's computing, music, domestic science. These were the art. These were the subjects that almost all students loved. So I would say for that particular cohort, part of their alienation was probably to do with the subject, but it might also be to do with the wider culture of the school, with how is their accent addressed? What are their chances in extracurricular activity? Are they making the school football team, the school hurling team? Are they getting onto the school orchestra and the school musical? Schools are interesting places culturally and have all kinds of cues for telling people they either belong or don't belong. So it isn't always down just to the subject, though it often, in a sense, gravitates to the subject. And it can come down, in many of these cases, to a really difficult relationship between a particular teacher and the student. And many students, and I agree with what Emer is saying, what the minister's saying. I actually do think Youth Reach is a wonderful program. And I was tangentially involved with it at its very beginning. But it has one real problem, which is that it is not the program of choice for many students. It is, it's more a kind of a restitutive program than it is a program of choice. And making Youth Reach as a program of choice in second level would be a very interesting kind of challenge to present to the second level system. So I think the second level system is doing really well on multiple ways. We're very lucky in Ireland that we still produce very high quality teachers. We still, I think, second level students, the sense I have of it is they're much happier in school than they were in my time in second level school. I hated second level, I will be honest. It was a nightmare. That's not my experience, I think, predominantly nowadays. But nonetheless, there is a cohort which is unhappy, which is dissatisfied, for who are not having their needs met there. And it'd be very interesting to find a system that had the ability within itself to be flexible enough to respond to those kinds of diverse needs.
You can relate to plenty of people who are frustrated at second level and want to drop out of the system. And like, obviously Youth Reach is a key part of it, but like even to make Youth Reach that it's a route that people can come back into maybe third level from in due course as well. What's your sense of this from the people you engage with?
Yeah, so for me, you know, I would share the same view as what Tom has around Youth Reach. And for me, I never went to Youth Reach myself personally, but I'm aware of it. I've worked closely with a lot of the Youth Reaches in the counties. But for me, I think there's a lot of room. They do phenomenal work. And but for me, again, going back to the original argument around the LCA students, we would have a lot of students in there who would be sitting in the LCA. So for me, I would come up with that question around focusing more on transitions. But the apprenticeships, going back to the apprenticeships, I welcome the reforms and the supports that the minister has put in place. And I'm sitting back watching that because I go to different areas every week, once a month, and I meet students, and a lot of it comes up around apprenticeship. So, and the difficulty of actually being able to obtain an apprenticeship. So we try and support the best way that we can there. So I'm sitting back and looking to see how that works. But for me, Youth Reach is a good initiative, but I do think that there is some room for improvement. So for instance, like if I work with students in there who do the LCA again, I'll go back to it. The difficulty for them is that they come up with a level 4, and then like just for me around the higher education route, I understand about the apprenticeships and how important it is, but giving them more options at the onset once they finish the LCA, I think that it should be on an equal footing there. I still can't understand in my own head why once they finish the LCA that they can't do an early school leaver access, you know what I mean? But the apprenticeships are very important, and I'm aware of all the good work the minister is doing. But I have to say the staff in the Youth Reaches across the country, I know they're very dedicated, and they're very dedicated to the students.
Just, we're moving on in time, and just two areas I'd like to touch on, then maybe get a concluding comment from each of you in terms of advice. Just the whole pressures within the system, and I'll come to you first on an email, in terms of the stress that it puts on people, particularly around this whole idea of the pressure that's focused around one exam, and that for many perceive it as the whole future depends on that exam. What can we do to actually alleviate that stress or to take it away? Because mental health and just the stress put on people in these situations, perhaps it's unnecessary. We maybe don't have to be in that situation. I don't know if you have any perspective on it, Emer.
No, absolutely. I think a lot of the Leaving Cert focuses around this one big terminal exam at the end of the year. And I think what we've seen, especially over the last number of years, is that want for change. And we've seen it within second level students, but also, in their parents and their teachers, and in the entire second level community, is the want for that move to a continuous assessment model. It's something that we recently suggested to the Oireachtas on their discussions when it came to reform of the Leaving Cert. But, by introducing this we'll say model of continuous assessment where it's over the course of a few different years, it's not just one terminal exam at the end, it completely takes the pressure off of students. I think a lot of people relate the Leaving Cert, you know, to that experience, the experience of the terminal exam. It's where this fear of the Leaving Cert come from. You'll often hear a lot of people, you know, saying that they have nightmares about the Leaving Cert 40 years after sitting it. And it's because of this terminal exam. Your whole secondary school education is building up to this one big exam over the course of 2 weeks in however many subjects you sit. And it's not healthy. It puts a really big amount of stress on students that is completely unnecessary when we could be spreading that out over the course of, you know, 2 to 3 years, if you include transition year. And we could really be alleviating that stress on students by ensuring that, you know, we're catering to all styles of learning through, you know, whether that's visual, audio, or hands-on, you know, through different projects, through orals when it comes to different subjects, you know, through orals as well, and just making sure that we're catering to each student, but that we're also ensuring that we're, you know, gathering how they progress through education. You know, a student that starts 5th year is not the same student at the end of 6th year. And, you know, that should be reflected. You know, we need to be, I suppose, measuring their education and measuring how they progress from, you know, the start of 5th year to the end of 6th year. And I think that's really what should be used to come up with this overall grade. Now, of course, in subjects where it might be necessary, we can include a final year exam. But the point is that it wouldn't rely on it. You know, if you didn't perform well on the day, that's okay. You still have a really good grade to back you up from your years of work. And it would take that stress off the students. And this is really just reiterated in our report on senior cycle reform as well.
I know, and you probably would echo similar thoughts in terms of that crunch exam in one big week or fortnight in the middle of June after 5 years' work. It's not really the way to do it, is it?
I believe in continuous assessment also. I do believe that it's the best way forward, but I am also aware of the challenges that are to try and get that reform in place, and that, so I'm aware of it. So for me, I would agree with Emer. So I stand in solidarity with Emer on this one. For me, I do believe that I studied exams in university myself, where I didn't do too well on them. However, it was the continuous assessments or the assignments that got me, you know, to where I needed to be. So that's something that I would agree with Emer.
Yeah, I'm just conscious, if we can just, I have one other question to come to, and then I'll give, as I say, wrap up. But just on that one before we move to Tom, what's your perspective in terms of like the mental pressure that it comes with one ultimate exam and what the impact it has on people?
Yeah, well, I can only in one sense talk anecdotally about a Colm. It's clearly is a very dysfunctional approach. I would say in my time working in the Irish university system, over nearly 4 decades of working in the system, I think the thing that struck me most in that period was how the issue of mental health in students emerged as the central critical issue for higher education students in Ireland in the early years of this century. That would be my overwhelming sense of the third level sector in Ireland at the moment. And this was pre-COVID, obviously. So the impact of COVID is kind of unimaginable on health and well-being. But we were looking at an epidemic of mental health challenges in the third level student population before COVID ever struck. Now, I'm not saying, I don't know, to be honest, what that's down to. It might have nothing whatever to do with the examination system, but it is, I think many people who work in Irish higher education would probably attest to that observation. I am not a great fan of continuous assessment as simply a replacement of terminal assessment, because in one sense it is terminal assessment. It's also high stakes assessment, and we might argue that all it is continuous pressure. What I do think is really important is that we ask, why is the Leaving Cert a high stakes exam? What gives it its high stakes quality? And I think what gives it and accords it its high stakes dimension is the fact that it's used for progression. If it wasn't used for that purpose, its primary purpose would be one of certifying second level. And that's not a hugely difficult thing to do. So it is of high stakes dimension. It's what leads to the worry is that if you don't do well, you don't get what you want in third level. I was heavily involved in junior cert reform. I always felt that junior cert reform in Ireland didn't go far enough. It went a long way, but it could have gone much further. And I love the idea of multiple ways of assessing learning, such as Emer has mentioned, you know, whether it's through project-based, through audio, through oral, through video, through the multiple ways. Junior cert, I think, had the capacity to really expand those possibilities, and that would have fed through to leaving cert. So I think the real question is about how do we approach assessment, and to what extent is it assessment for learning as opposed to assessment of learning? Because students need to learn from feedback, from quality interaction with peers and with other teachers about what they need, about what they're good at, what they could improve. And I think the leaving cert really is very poor at that kind of assessment. So I would be looking at continuous for sure, but also multiple modes of assessment and assessment for learning rather than just of learning, and constantly interrogating why is it a high stakes exam in the first instance. It was one time, there is utterly no need for it to be a high stakes exam now.
Yeah. Just absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more in terms of taking away, if you like, the assessment to help learning as opposed to measure learning. And I think that's such an inspirational sort of a concept. Just one last, and I might, Tom, you referenced it in your earlier remarks, so I'll just come to the other two on it, and I know you did make a play on it already, but the importance of, let's say, travel and Erasmus and programs like that. I'll put in the question to the two. Owen, do you think we make enough, frankly, of travel, and enough of Erasmus, enough of maybe, when you look at our level of, let's say, languages or that, we probably wouldn't be one of the stronger performers across Europe in terms of our language proficiency. Do you think we should do more in terms of the offering the opportunity to travel to students, or what's your sense of that?
I think we have a very good Erasmus program in place, and you know, I think,
do we promote it enough?
I think we could do a little bit more, and I think, you know, for me, you know, really and truly, when it comes to equality, diversity, and inclusion, and getting to know other people's cultures and that, and the different, to get to know other people's countries, I suppose it does do a lot of work in that regard. However, you know, for me, I would be in favour of the Erasmus, but I'm being honest, I haven't availed of it myself.
Yeah.
But I do.
So we're not promoting it enough. Is the point?
No, we're not promoting it. No. But I am aware. I am aware of the importance of it, and about the solidarity and how barriers and the importance of young people going abroad. But Emer may be best to answer.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. Emer, what's your thoughts on that? What's your thoughts on it?
I think particularly something that, you know, our different Gaelic philosophy across the country have taught us is that there's no better way to learn language than immersing yourself in it fully. You know, I think we should be sending students that are learning French to France for a few months, really let them experience that language in full, let them experience the culture. And the very same for students learning Spanish or students learning, you know, German or whatever language they choose to study, if they choose to study one. You know, I think, you know, the Erasmus program really gives students an opportunity to do that. And you see it used at third level quite often. And I think including that in second level would definitely be a very welcome move forward, whether that's in transition year, whether it's, you know, a month-long program in fifth year for students to immerse themselves in the culture of another country. I think travel is very often regarded as one of the best ways to learn, and there are just certain things that you can't learn in school, and I think travel is one of the best ways to do that. You're meeting new people, you're engaging yourself in different cultures, and being a member of the EU allows us to do that. We can travel freely across so many different countries and learn so much about different cultures. I think it's definitely something that we need to be better utilizing, but also, like Owen Patrick said, better communicating to students that it is an option for them to take up.
Absolutely, and I think it's something, as you say, we should do it more. We should embed it more into the second level curriculum, or as you say, transition years or that, because there's nothing better than immersing someone in a language and a culture that really makes them, as much as anything, appreciate the language, haven't got the feel for the culture that comes with the language, if you like. Just to finish up, I'll come to all three, and I might leave you to last, Emer, because you're perhaps the closest to the student. But a word of advice, or a couple of lines of advice to the students that are, be it at second level or looking at their options, or where to from here, and the pressures and all the things that the students have to face. Just as a wrap-up point, Tom, you first. What's your overriding line or a couple of lines of advice to a student today that you think they need to recognise?
Well, I'd say carpe diem, just seize the day, and they'll never be 18 again. So that's the best advice I could give an 18-year-old, I think. All this will seem in a little while to have been, they will probably wonder why they were so concerned about it. But for the moment, it'll certainly preoccupy us. So that's all I would say.
Perfect.
And go for it.
I think so. Take advantage or seize the moment and make the most of it, and enjoy it and love it, I think, is a key part of it as well. Owen Patrick?
I think, for me, my bit of advice would be to be aware that there's more than one pathway to success. There's lots of pathways, and be also conscious of the importance of reaching out and asking for support, because there's a lot of people out there that will support you, and how important that is. So for me, they would be the things. There's different pathways to success. Success is defined differently by everyone, and reach out and get support. We're all here to help you in whatever capacity that we can.
Thanks, Owen Patrick. And Emer?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, just to echo what Owen Patrick and Tom have said, but I think, from our perspective, the Leaving Cert, it's not the end of the world. And if you don't get what you want, that's okay. It happens to so many students across the country, and there are other options. Like Owen Patrick said, you can do an apprenticeship, you can do a PLC, you can take a gap year. Not everything relies on the Leaving Cert, and I think it's really important to know that it's definitely something that I didn't listen to as a student, and something that I wish I did, because I think it would have alleviated a lot of stress. So just know that it's not the end of the world, and that there are an abundance of different supports out there, should you need them as well.
I think that's wonderful advice, and the only bit I'd add to from all of you, I think, and it sums up a little of what you are saying too, is if people can learn to love education and love learning, that's something they can have with all their life, if you like. It's not just when they're a student, they're not just continuous education and the various things. Like the culture perhaps we've created is that problem where we don't instill a love of learning among people, and the different types of different options you have. And I think that comes very strong from yours, Emer. I just want to finish by basically thanking the four panelists. I've been delighted to facilitate the knowledge that all you have of the system. Sadly, the Minister had to leave us earlier, but I know he had a hectic schedule, and it was great for him to stay with us for so long. To Emer, the perspective that you give us in terms of second level, and the fact that you are now championing a voice of second level that perhaps certainly in my day wasn't championed to the degree it should. And how can you possibly have the system where the voice of the participant in it is not being exercised to the degree it should? And I think you've done such work to improve on that. And likewise, in your own regard, the notion of including everybody, and also being a role model in yourself in terms of that whole area of inclusion, and getting people that may be somewhat disconnected from the system. And you pointed out yourself that you didn't necessarily finish your leaving, or that wasn't the route you went. And I think that's such an education in itself too, to see where the road can take them. And finally, Tom, from your own wisdom many generations. It's clear to see from the perspective you've had on every aspect of what we spoke about here tonight. I'd just like to thank you as well. And to all the audience as well for the questions that came in and for the participation. Really, really appreciate it. I know there was one comment made about the fact that we only had, if you like, we had a male presenter, which I organised it, so I can't too much about the fact that I'm male. We have a male minister, the minister is male, but there are plenty, I would point to, there are plenty of MEPs that are female as well, so the balance is good there. But I think it was important that we had gender, we had inclusion in terms of sectoral inclusion, and we also had the generational spread as well. So I think we did our efforts to make sure for inclusion, and in other webinars we've had perhaps a stronger gender balance as well. So I'd like to thank everybody for their efforts and their engagement, and I'd like to thank the panelists for the effort they made in terms of the detail we went through, and look forward to something similar again soon, and hopefully you can join us then. Thank you all.
Thanks, Colm.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Everybody.